Good day, everyone. Let's talk about sulfur cycle. So before we go on to the process, first, what is sulfur? Sulfur is a non-metal element. When sulfur burns, it creates a toxic gas called sulfur dioxide. There are two sources in which sulfur comes from. First, we have natural sources like volcano eruptions, bacterial processes, evaporation from water, or decaying organisms. Second, human sources, mainly a consequence of industrial processes where sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide gases are emitted on a wide scale. Take note that the sulfur cycle occurs on both terrestrial ecosystem and marine ecosystem.
Before we will proceed in discussing the sulfur cycle, we must remember some of the most frequently used terminology in encountering the sulfur cycle. First is mineralization. It is the decomposition of the chemical compounds in an organic matter. Second is oxidation and defined as the process of losing electrons. Next is a sulfate reduction. It's a type of anaerobic respiration that utilizes sulfate as a terminal electron acceptor. Lastly will be incorporation. It is where the process of changing sulfide into an organic compound.
Mineralization is the process that a sulfur is mainly cycled throughout the soil environment and seawater in the marine environment. The example for this cycle is that the sulfur or sulfate found in the lithosphere and are released by weathering. Also, spray of waves to the shore releases sulfur dioxide to the atmosphere. Dust storms also releases sulfur dioxide as sulfur stored in the ground. Volcanic eruption also release hydrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. Burning of fossil fuels, marine algae produces dimethyl sulfide that enters the atmosphere as tiny droplets. Decomposition releases sulfur dioxides to the atmosphere and also hot springs.
Marine algae produce dimethyl sulfide that enters the atmosphere as tiny droplets. And sulfur dioxide gas also forms when dimethyl sulfide reacts with oxygen gas. The burning of fossil fuels also releases sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide reacts with oxygen in atmosphere and creates sulfur trioxide. Sulfur trioxide reacts with water in atmosphere to produce sulfuric acid. And also sulfur trioxide reacts the ammonia in the atmosphere to produce sulfate salts. So this is the process is what we call oxidation.
Process of reduction, the sulfuric acid and sulfate salts falls on the ground by precipitation like a rainfall. The soil absorbs sulfate salts and the plants absorb that sulfate salts from the soil. So in the food chain, the animals eats the plants and gets the sulfur as for their proteins. No, the animals then release that sulfur when they decay. As the animals decay, they release sulfate salts and hydrogen sulfide. And also in the reduction process, an aerobic bacteria converts sulfate into sulfide through a process known as sulfate reduction. The bacteria are genetically and physiologically diverse group that are most frequently found in the aquatic habitats where they function as decomposers. They can also be found in the large quantities of sulfur springs like those in Yellowstone, where sulfate is plentiful and constantly supplied. Operations involves the changing of sulfide into organic compounds. This can include metal-containing derivatives. Microorganisms have the ability to immobilize sulfur compounds, which ultimately results in subsequent incorporation of these sulfur compounds into organic form of sulfur. So in incorporation stage or a process, aerobic bacteria converts the sulfur into sulfate salts, which again the plants absorbs and release back the sulfur gas into the atmosphere. And the cycle just repeating.